Insulin resistance, signs and symptoms. Everyone knows today that insulin resistance is a big problem, but how do you know that you have it? Do you have to go get blood work, or are there certain things that you could tell anyway? Today we're going to talk about that, and we're going to explain it so that you have a good understanding. Coming right up. When I started planning this video, I wanted to see what was available in the medical world, so I went online and I looked up the Mayo Clinic signs and symptoms of insulin resistance. And I had to say I was surprised when the Mayo Clinic says that it generally has no signs and symptoms. That insulin resistance is not generally associated with any signs and symptoms. And I'm thinking, but there's all these things we're going to talk about. Don't they have... Isn't Mayo Clinic supposed to be like the best of the best? Maybe they have the doctors just see patient and someone else writes the website. I'm not sure, but anyway, then I looked at a website called diabetes.co.uk, and I don't think it's a government website, but it's like a community for diabetes, and they had certainly heard of a few things. So they had listed one sign would be lethargy or fatigue, that you're tired all the time, you don't have any energy. Second would be hunger, and that is certainly a common sign because insulin resistance keeps you from using the fuel that you have stored in your body. So I did a video on the basics of insulin resistance. So if you haven't seen that yet, then go and check that out as well. Third, they have poor focus and concentration. Number 4, weight gain. Do you know anyone who has gained weight? Well, that's a sign of insulin resistance. And when we go through these, keep in mind that insulin resistance doesn't mean that you have all of these. You could certainly have this without insulin resistance, meaning that there's another cause for it, and you could be insulin resistant without having all or most or hardly any of these. Anything is possible, but when we look at it, we see what large groups of people have found associated with insulin resistance. Number 5, belly fat. That's a big one because the insulin tends to create insulin resistance and start in the liver, and then the fat starts building up in the midsection, so that the classic apple shape of weight gain is typically associated with insulin resistance, and therefore it is also associated with the greatest health risks. That's the kind of fat that is strongly associated with degenerative disease. So those were things that I found online, and then I've had some courses also in functional medicine, and we're going to get into a little more detail and talk about these things. So number 6, fatigue in general is a sign, but especially if it happens after a meal, because when you eat and your blood sugar goes up, that blood sugar is supposed to go into the cell. But if you're insulin resistant, the cell is resisting that glucose. It can't get out of the bloodstream, and the food you ate just keeps jacking up the blood sugar. Now the only way the body can get rid of the glucose is to turn it into triglycerides. So that's why the blood triglycerides go up, but it's also why you get tired, because converting that glucose to triglycerides is very expensive. Digesting food is expensive. It uses a lot of energy to start with, but then if you have to convert the glucose to triglycerides, now you're kind of wasting or spending energy on two fronts. 7, you wake with sugar cravings, because with insulin resistance, you're not having a steady blood sugar, you're not using the sugar in your body because it can't get into the cell, so your body constantly has cravings and want more. And if you wake with sugar cravings, that's a sign of insulin resistance. If you have sugar cravings after meals, that you have already eaten food, your body is supposed to be satisfied, but the sugar can't get into the cell because of the insulin, and now your body just wants more. The insulin makes you hungry. It gives you the cravings. Sugar cravings not satisfied by sweets. that you eat sugar and you still have cravings for more and more sugar. If you crash after lunch, you can get fatigue in general, but especially after lunch, you crash and you can't make it through the afternoon without caffeine or without stimulants. If you wake up and you're not rested, that's another sign. Or if you are unable to lose the weight. So it's one thing to gain the weight. Insulin is responsible for most weight gain in terms of packing on the weight. But then if you try just about everything, if you try the calorie restriction and the smaller meals and the exercise and the deprivation and nothing happens, then chances are very good that you are insulin resistant. If you have difficulty falling asleep, that's another sign of insulin resistance. If you have joint pain, if you have depression or anxiety, then those are also signs of insulin resistance. And now we're getting to some of the fun stuff here. It's not so fun for the people who have it, but it's sort of interesting how far-reaching these effects can be. Androgen, there's an androgen shift. In females, the females turn more masculine. That's an androgen shift. And what happens there is there's an enzyme called lyase that is upregulated by insulin. And in females, it has the tendency to convert estrogen into testosterone. So the female body makes estrogen, but the insulin starts a process to convert it into testosterone. So now they have testosterone excess, more testosterone than a female should have. And this affects as many as 10% of the women in childbearing age. Because of that, with the testosterone, with a hormone imbalance, then they can't get pregnant. So this is actually the number one reason for infertility in the Western world is insulin resistance. They also get hirsutism or hirsutism, however you want to pronounce that. And what that is, it's unwanted hair growth. So males and females grow hair in slightly different places, and especially males, when they get older and they have more testosterone, then the hair stops growing in places where you might want it, and it starts growing more so in the places you don't want it, such as out of the ears and out of the nose and on the chin. So with females getting this androgen shift and this testosterone dominance, they start getting that same kind of unwanted hair growth. In males, the opposite thing happens. So in males, there is something called aromatase upregulation. So it's a different enzyme, but it's the same sort of effect, but opposite. So insulin resistance, a lot of insulin upregulates aromatase, which in men converts testosterone to estrogen. So it's the kind of the same problem, but opposite. Females turn more masculine and men turn more feminine. As a result of that, with too much estrogen, then men can get erectile dysfunction and they can get what's commonly known as man boobs. And we did a video on that and explained that in a little more detail also. And it's so important to understand these principles because a lot of guys go in and get their blood work and they get a hormone panel and they see that they're low in testosterone. So they give them a cream, a testosterone cream to start rubbing, but in the presence of insulin, they're just upregulating their aromatase, and all the testosterone that they're rubbing in the cream gets converted into estrogen. So they're just making the problem worse if they don't understand this. And it's also really, really tough on the grandkids because when grandma turns into grandpa and the kids can't tell them apart anymore, that's really hard on them. So if you're a grandpa and your grandkid comes up and calls you grandma, that could also be a sign of insulin resistance. So that's 21 signs and symptoms that you may be insulin resistant. And a sign or symptom is something that either someone can observe, that's a sign, or something you experience, that's a symptom. So if you find something on blood work, then that's a test. That's not really a sign or a symptom. But I wanted to include a few more here at the end because most people in the Western world get blood work, some kind of blood work with some regularity. So most of these things are known to us. Most women go to an OBGYN and they get an ultrasound or something and they find out. So if you have PCOS, that is also very strongly associated with insulin resistance. PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It can give very irregular periods, very painful symptoms with your menstrual period, and it also often results in infertility. Number 23, most people know if they have high blood pressure, that is often associated with insulin resistance. Cholesterol imbalances, a raised total cholesterol, but also an increased LDL and a decreased HDL, meaning the ratio between the two gets worse, often associated with insulin resistance. And increased triglycerides, like we talked about. If the body has no place to put the sugar, it has to convert it into triglycerides. That's one of the fastest and simplest ways of understanding this. And when people go on a low carb or a ketogenic diet, and this amazes a lot of people, but if you understand that mechanism, it is so obvious that if you cut your carbs to almost zero and you start eating lots and lots of fat, your blood fats go down, and it happens very quickly. And because insulin is a hormone and it is the dominant, it's like the sledgehammer of all hormones. If it is out of balance, it's very likely that a lot of other hormones will be out of balance, not just testosterone and estrogen, but it can influence virtually every other hormone in the body. So in addition to blood work, which we're going to go over on some later videos and talk about how to analyze that and what tests to do to really understand this, there are lots and lots of ways that you can start noticing if you might have insulin resistance. And since the Mayo Clinic hadn't heard of any of these, maybe someone would be nice enough to share the link with them so that they could be informed as well. Right now, the official guidelines for insulin resistance is to eat low-fat and high-carb diet with lots and lots of grains. And that's really sad because that's a diet that's pretty much guaranteed to cause diabetes if you are insulin resistant. It will make it worse. And I was very, very pleased to notice on this British website that they said a low-carb diet or a ketogenic diet, which is a very low-carb diet, can be the most beneficial and the most helpful in reversing insulin resistance. And that's, of course, what everyone in the keto and low-carb community knows, is that that's the mechanism that actually works. So if you're new to this channel, then make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. And share this information with people you care about, because this is killing millions and millions of people. There are tens of millions of new cases of insulin resistance every year, and it doesn't have to be that way. All they have to know is how it really works, and that's what we talk about on this channel. Thanks for watching.